Welcome to our 2021 DIA one-on-one video series. I'm with Tom Mueller, Chief Commercial Officer of ACM Global Laboratories. Hi, Tom.
Good morning.
Good to see you, and I'm excited to talk about global clinical and laboratory services. Let's talk about how the past year changed your operations.
Thank you for that question. It's really exciting to be here and talk about what's going on in the central lab world and clinical trials in general. As everyone knows, last year was a disruptive year with COVID, and there are many things that have changed throughout our industry, as well as within the central lab business itself. Starting first and foremost, really was the immediate disruption to individuals working from home, having to adjust to the pandemic, and then where the focus was going to be as far as new asset development. We saw a big shift early on to move away from therapeutic indications and really focusing on COVID research, whether that be within vaccine or therapeutic development, which actually still continues today.
I was going to say, are you seeing a shift back away, a little bit away from the vaccines and back to normal operations, or is it still a mix?
It's still a mix. It's an interesting dynamic. Most of our customers, it seems to me that everything got put on hold with COVID, but yet corporate directives and yearly milestones still have not changed or moved away from their goalposts. So as we're coming back from the immediate lockdown and the immediate effects of COVID, not only do we have the increase of COVID research, but we also have companies scrambling to get back to their timelines and their track record that they had prior to the pandemic. So it's a mix, but it's also an accelerated mix that we need to be aware of to not only bring COVID therapies and vaccines to market, but also getting the rest of therapeutic areas back on track.
It's going to be interesting times ahead, I'm sure. In terms
Indeed.
of that, what are some of the lessons you learned over the past year that you're going to take forward, because we're moving from what was to what is next?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple different areas. First one of concern is really immediate, and that has to do with supply chain management. So as not only the clinical trial CRO and sponsor staff went on hiatus during the lockdown, so did manufacturers of kits, supplies, and reagents. Unfortunately, that has not rebounded, and we're actually starting to see the end of that supply chain disruption in current day clinical trials. So I think the biggest lesson learned, and one thing that ACM in particular has been on top of, is really understanding, managing, and giving clarity around that supply chain for every clinical trial and study. At ACM, what we try to do is look at each protocol individually with a depth and rigor that looks at that entire supply chain. So we're not just bidding on projects to bid on them or win the business. We want to be a true partner with our sponsors and our CROs ahead of time before they commit to which central lab they want to service their study, and ensure that we have visibility or line of sight to these kits, reagents, and supplies, because unfortunately some of these are single source vendors, and it may not be a company disruption, but you'll have a similar disruption across any different central lab or CRO. I think the biggest lesson learned there is absolute transparency, proactive partnership, so the study design and the expectations can be set, met, and delivered on with proper execution in a way that just can't be done like we did prior to COVID. I think probably the second area of focus is really something that was developed and moving forward well before COVID, and that's the implement of moving forward with real world data. So before ACM, I came from a healthcare data and analytics firm where we looked at a large data set really around the commercial space of phase 2B and beyond. There's a huge gap right now in clinical data, especially around clinical trials, that I think companies like ACM can be a pivotal and play a pivotal role in and help augment the larger data set to get a true vision and view of the entire patient journey from time of diagnosis all the way through treatment, adherence, and remission of disease.
Excellent, Tom. Obviously, you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the global testing trial arena. What are a couple of the trends you see on the horizon?
I think we've started to see prior to COVID again a shift to hybrid trials, remote clinical trials. Unfortunately, it seems like the clinical trial industry is about 10 years behind everyone else when it comes to innovation. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of factors involved with that when it comes to patient reach, population sizing, and being able to bring the right patients in to the right trials. So with COVID, we've seen a slight blip or an acceleration around hybrid clinical trials, and something that ACM in particular is very focused on. We have a unique set of tools to be able to develop and support hybrid clinical trials, to include kit development. We even have these little kit caddies that is almost like a suit box that we can send and have bespoke specifically for remote nursing staff, for example. So when they go to visit a patient's home, they have not only everything they need for the clinical trial, but they also have everything that they need in the field should something go awry, whether that be extra butterfly needles, etc. So by the time that remote nurse team leaves their headquarters or their home office, they have everything they need in a compact box to be able to service that patient at time of visit and be able to transport then that testing on to a central lab or a individual lab to be tested.
Excellent. It sounds like you've got all those bases covered, and what a great way to move forward as we move out of the pandemic. I want to thank you so much for sharing some of your insights and spending some time with us for our DIA one-on-one video.
Thanks so much. Be well.